Why isn't LEGO Technic more popular?
They don't have good IPs, they're hard to build, and there are no minifigures.
Well, yes, someone's been reading my notes again, but if you want to hear my more detailed thoughts, stick around. Hello all, I'm Josh, this is Josh Builds Stuff, and today I was going to just review this little LEGO Technic skid steer loader, but instead I thought it would be a little more fun to explore a larger question. That question is, why isn't Technic more popular? Now, I was originally going to just talk about this one little new Technic set that I got, but that review would have gone a little something like this. This is the LEGO Technic Skid Steer Loader set. It was just released in January 2021, contains 140 pieces and only costs $10 here in the US. This little set is decent, it's got some movement, it's got a little bit of playability, it looks nice enough for what it is, which is like a little forklift bucket loader kind of thing. Kids like it, they can play with it, but other than that, there's not much worth talking about in relation to this set. But it's only $10, so yes, you should get it. And that would be that as far as a review for this little set. But when building this little set, I had some larger thoughts that I thought would be a little more fun to talk about today. But let's first talk about how I got here. Well, one night back in 1987, around New Year's, my parents decided they liked each other a little more than usual, and they decided that it would be nice if my brother had a, well, brother. Next thing you know, I'm here talking about LEGO. And maybe let's not talk about how I got here, let's talk about how I arrived at this question of Technic being less popular than regular LEGO. Well, lately I have been building a lot of LEGO Technic sets, and for the most part I am a big fan of the stuff LEGO is pumping out lately. I think they look really nice, I think they're constructed really well, and they appeal to me as an older LEGO fan. Let me start off by saying that everything I'm talking about today is just my own personal perception and observations based on what I think the larger LEGO community is a fan of. And speaking of that community, I am a member or a participant of a lot of different LEGO sub-communities. Those include subreddits and Discord channels and forums and whatnot. And on these platforms, I observe plenty of people talking about LEGO, obviously. And people are talking about things that they're building and new sets that they're excited that are coming out that they want to get, and across all of these different platforms and mediums and whatnot, there's one category of LEGO that I don't see talked about as much, and that is LEGO Technic. LEGO Technic sets are those like you see in front of me here. They're almost entirely constructed out of little pins and axles and beam pieces, and they're put together with some of these cover plate pieces to look like the vehicles or whatnot that they are meant to represent. And vehicles are largely what LEGO Technic is usually themed around. We've got sports cars and jeeps and monster trucks and a lot of construction vehicles with some advanced mechanical parts, and that, I mean, is kind of the bread and butter of what Technic is capable of doing. They're capable of doing a lot of advanced like mechanical movements and technical ability kind of things, pun intended, but even in traditional LEGO sets, Technic pieces are used for either like structural parts of a build which get covered in traditional LEGO, or they're used to kind of orchestrate the mechanical movement playable bits of regular old LEGO sets. But as an older LEGO fan, I really like LEGO vehicles and really any LEGO sets that I can display rather than play with, and so I think that's another reason that Technic happens to appeal to me as an older person. But that doesn't mean that traditional LEGO system sets can't make really great looking vehicles, right? Just look at the LEGO Star Wars line. Most of my favorite LEGO sets happen to be LEGO Star Wars ships, and none of those, to my knowledge, are built out of Technic sets. They're all just regular old LEGO pieces. And that brings me to my first reason why I think Technic is not as popular as regular old LEGO, and that's because they don't have the IPA of some regular sets. What does that mean? Well, I kind of just made it up. IPA is intellectual property appeal. As you may or may not know, a lot of the most popular LEGO sets out right now are based on equally popular intellectual properties, or IPs. Those like Star Wars and Marvel and LEGO Trolls. Maybe that one's not as popular as some of the others, but basically there are a lot of LEGO sets that are based on licensed properties that LEGO can utilize their intellectual property and turn them into LEGO sets and then price them a little higher than some traditional sets of LEGO's own design, because we're also paying for the licensing on top of the set itself. Now, I don't think this is a bad thing. I like LEGO Star Wars sets as much, if not more, than most people, but if you notice something about LEGO Technic sets, they tend to lack those IPs. Like I said, there aren't like Star Wars and Marvel Technic sets. There's like a big lever something crane that's very expensive, and I guess technically a lot of these sets are based on licensing, like Ferraris and McLarens and Jeeps and whatnot, but it's not like one big franchise. They seem more like one-off licensing deals that happen to be appealing to both LEGO and the other licensee licensor of the property. You know what I mean. And while Ferraris and Jeeps may be popular, they're obviously nowhere near as popular as entertainment giants like Disney, where they have properties like Star Wars and Marvel, and well, I guess there's Disney-themed LEGO sets themselves, which aren't as popular as the others, but what I'm saying is that Technic lacks some of that IP appeal, and so without that larger branding behind them, I think that LEGO Technic is always going to fall a little behind. And speaking of Star Wars, that brings me to my next point about the unpopularity-ness of LEGO Technic versus regular LEGO, and I say speaking of Star Wars because I'm looking at the UCS Millennium Falcon behind me and I'm thinking about how hard that set was to put together, and now I'm thinking about how hard it is to put together LEGO Technic sets by comparison. The second point I'm getting to here is that LEGO Technic, at least in my opinion, is much more difficult to build and just build with in general compared to traditional LEGO. I'm talking about that UCS Millennium Falcon because of how long it took me to build. That set was what, 7,000 some pieces? I think back in the day it took me like 25 to 30 hours to build total, which is not unreasonable. It's a very large, very tedious kind of set. But then I'm also thinking about how long it took me to build the Lamborghini Sion, which is behind me here. That set, comparatively, much fewer pieces, was only like 3,000 some pieces. I think it's like half the piece count of the Millennium Falcon. And yet, that set, because it's Technic, took me at least as long as the Millennium Falcon did, if not actually a little longer. Now, I don't know if this is just because I am slightly less experienced with building with Technic, or it just, by its nature, it takes longer to do that kind of building with all the pins and axles and beams and whatnot, but whatever it is, the build process was very different. Now here's something I'm hesitant to say, but I think it's time that I finally speak my truth. Building with LEGO Technic is less fun than building with regular LEGO. Now again, this is all just my own personal opinions here, but I don't think it's as fun of a build process to click in little pins into little beams and axles and whatnot. Some of the gears and mechanical building parts, those are fun, but even so, there's this problem when building with Technic, and that's that it's harder to see the larger picture as you're building it. Let me give an example. If you're building like a traditional LEGO set of a little building or a little ship, you kind of know where you are in the build while you're building it. You're like, oh, I'm building up a little wall, or oh, I'm building a little wing of the ship and whatnot. And you can kind of feel and see the shape as it's coming together. With Technic, I largely find myself kind of lost as to where I am. I'm following the instructions, and sure, that's a bit of a cathartic process just in and of itself, but even while you're building things, you're like, oh, I don't really know where in the build this particular section is going to go. You're just kind of sticking a bunch of beams and L-shaped pieces together, and you're like, this is surely going to stick to the larger structure of the entire build, but I couldn't exactly tell you where it's going to go. And so the build itself is a little less fun. I think the finished products themselves, they still look great, and not every part of the build isn't fun. Sure, there's plenty of the build where you're like, oh, I'm building the hood of the car, or I'm sticking the wheels on, or oh, look, I've built the little steering column. Obviously, a lot of this is based on examples of building a lot of LEGO Technic cars, but I'm just saying the build is a little less appealing than a traditional LEGO build. But speaking about building Technic, I actually think the largest downfall of LEGO Technic sets is in their unbuilding or rebuilding capabilities. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that with traditional LEGO, if you're taking apart a set and you want to build something new using a bunch of LEGO pieces, it's a little easier to do. And even if you observe like a lot of the LEGO creative builders out there and people who design their own LEGO sets, well, they're almost entirely doing that using traditional LEGO pieces. If I'm trying to think of like creative builders out there that I follow who largely use Technic pieces, almost the entirety of those builds are like machines and other like technical, mechanical marvels that are built kind of to serve some specific purpose or to have some cool movement or motion built into them, because that's really what Technic does well. But when I think about personally trying to have to design something using Technic pieces, I honestly wouldn't even know where to start. I think back to my childhood when I had K'NEX pieces, but I never really, beyond building like something using instructions that someone else gave me, I never really built anything impressive out of those K'NEX. I would be like putting little pieces together and someone would be like, oh, what are you building? And I'd be like, well, I put all these pieces together and now I've got a circle made out of K'NEX, because it was cool, it was fun to build with them, but I wasn't like, I'm gonna use these K'NEX to build a boat or an airplane or like a car or a vehicle or something. No, unless someone gave me instructions on how to build a Ferris wheel, I would be kind of lost. And well, that analogy is kind of one for one with Technic at this point, because you give me a bunch of Technic pieces, I would not know what to do with them. I can follow the instructions and build a Technic design that someone else designed that is much smarter than me, but on my own, I would be kind of lost. And I think I'm saying all of this to make my point that LEGO Technic is much more difficult and therefore a little less appealing to build creatively with than regular old LEGO pieces. Alright, that's 2 points down and elaborated on, and probably a little over elaborated on, but that brings me to my third and final point about why I think LEGO Technic is somewhat less popular than traditional LEGO sets, and that is that, well, I think it's a little less fun to play with LEGO Technic sets, or rather there's just a little less built-in playability when it comes to a Technic set as compared to a traditional LEGO set. I think this point has some built-in irony around it, and what I mean by that is I think LEGO Technic sets, if anything, they're built to be played with even more so than other LEGO sets, because they're just so structurally strong. I'm using the sets in front of me as an example because all of these sets have been in my office for a while. My kids have been playing with them. They're 3.5 and 1.5 years old. They can destroy anything, and they destroy regular LEGO sets very quickly. It's like their favorite thing to do is just take the LEGO set apart because Dad will just build it after everyone goes to bed. I'm not complaining about that. I love building LEGO, but these Technic sets, the kids, I mean, one, they haven't really tried to take them apart, but they've been crashing them into each other like crazy and just like bashing them all around the room. My kid literally drags this Jeep around the house like a little old school kid's pull toy by the little winch string, and the whole thing, it just stays together. The worst that happens is like a wheel pops off every once in a while, and that's largely intentional and easy enough to put back together. I'm saying all of this to say that Technic sets are built really strongly, and they can hold up to some intense play by kids, and yet I don't think they're as appealing to play with as some other sets. This brings me to a sub-point of this larger point, and that's that a lot of LEGO Technic sets lack something that is very appealing to a lot of LEGO fans, and that is the minifigure, of course. Again, there's a little bit of irony here because the little minifigure that I have is a little construction guy, and he happens to like fit really well in the seat of this skid steer loader, and yet most LEGO Technic sets, they don't come with minifigures, and they aren't really play sets, which would be where a lot of minifigures are usually included. Now, I say it all the time on this channel. I like sets which are displayable rather than playable. It's one of my favorite things to say, but even on the shelves behind me, the kind of sets that I have displayed are like the Star Wars helmets, and like Baby Yoda and BB-8 are up there, and just other things that tend to look well when they're put on a shelf. Sure, I like when vehicles have some playable functionality, but even like these cars and other vehicles, I really get them because I think they look nice on shelves. But like a play set of like an Avengers base, which is like a half of a building, and there are a bunch of minifigures in there and whatnot, and there's like missiles and things you can shoot around and stuff. Those sets are okay, but putting them on a shelf just isn't as appealing to me as an older person. So that's really what I mean when I say that I don't think people like to play with Technic sets as much as with traditional sets. You can only really drive a vehicle forward and backwards so many times, and granted, in my house, my kids will do that a lot, but it's only going to be so much time before my kids want to go find an Iron Man and a Spider-Man minifigure and pew-pew each other and find a stud shooter and shoot at the bad guys or whatnot. And I know most of us don't think very highly of stud shooters, but I guarantee you LEGO did some focus groups with some kids, and those kids love those suckers. Or I guess those shooters. And so, those are my 3 main points why I think Technic is less popular than traditional LEGO. They lack some of the IP appeal, they're a little more difficult to build and a little more difficult to build with, and they lack some of the playability, specifically when it comes to minifigures. But like I said earlier, all of this is purely my own speculation and perception. For all I know, I could be entirely wrong. Technic could be as popular, if not more popular than regular old LEGO, but I have a hunch that it's not. But I am curious to know what the rest of you out there think about my opinions and about this topic. Do you also think that Technic is less popular? Do you like Technic more? What are your reasons for or against this topic? Let's go old school debate class. We're back in school. I never actually took debate class in school. But let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. As always, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a little long-winded, but like I said, I didn't want to just give a usual short review of this little skid steer, and so I thought I would just talk for a whole lot longer instead. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.